Association of Churches.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
And, well, and president of the League of Women Voters.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
In Billings.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And your father ran for Secretary of State?
Yes, and our grandfather ran for governor, killed in an auto wreck in the primary, before the primary, and my dad lost his election as Secretary of State, but he served as the bank examiner for 8 years under Governor Nutter. Strong Republican.
Uh-huh, yes. And under Tim Babcock.
And Tim Babcock, yes.
Awesome.
Nutter died.
And
In a also airplane crash.
And
I was lobbyist for 4 terms, 8 years. Was in Helena most of the time, living there to lobby, and that was a very interesting job. I enjoyed it very much.
what were those years?
From 97, 99, 01, and 03.
Okay.
What were the issues you were lobbying about?
The Montana Association of Churches had about 15 different concerns, and so it depended on what bills were brought up as to what I worked on, but things like very strong against the death penalty. We worked with the ACLU and the Montana Catholic Conference on that, and the Human Rights Commission. And children's issues, caring for children, that was the years when they brought in that first child care program that we had nationally. What were some of the other issues?
Were those issues activated was the response to your lobbying effort positive, or did you find you were upheld most of the time?
Well, I felt that I was well respected, treated well by everyone. It was hard. I think one of the tough things in Montana, it is difficult to sit down with your representative during the sessions. They're always so busy, and so that's difficult. And another issue at that time was the gun lobby, and sometimes I was the only one that spoke up against the gun lobby, even though there were policemen in the back of the room wanting the bill to go down, whatever. But and so I was a little dangerous at times.
Really?
I felt some danger from the NRA.
Uh-huh. Were the Republicans in the majority in all of your 4 sessions? Or
No, most of the time the Democrats were in, at least in the House, I think. I can't remember because we were nonpartisan, and I tried not to label anyone. I went and talked to each person individually, and surprisingly, people often agreed who may have been on one end or the other. Christian right people agreed with us on many things who were Republicans, and I enjoyed arguing the Bible with them. It was a lot of fun. And so both sides were very, very polite. John Tester was there at the time, and he liked me a lot, so he remembers me even now, which is an honor.
Uh-huh. And yeah, I remember you saying that you had worked with him. And what sort of, was he in leadership at that point?
No, he wasn't. He was still just one of the members. But I didn't do anything special with him, but we just talked on issues. Agriculture issues, we were very supportive in agricultural issues, and so of course he was on that, and economic issues. So there were many things we had in agreement.
And then you followed that by being president of the League of Women Voters in Billings. And what about the League's involvement with regard to Montana politics and attitudes?
Well, that was 10 years in between. I did other things, but yes, at one point I thought I needed to help the League mainly get more people registered and voting, so the League's primary issue is trying to get more and more people to vote. And of course, this last year, it's very interesting because we had, we were supporting a bill to allow for mail-in ballots because we felt more people voted with mail-in ballots, and the Republican Party was very much opposed to that. They somehow feel that if more people vote, they won't get as many votes, which I can't quite understand that logic, but that's what they felt. And so that bill didn't, not sure it even got heard, but it certainly wasn't passed. And then we had the event with Gianforte, where everyone said, oh my gosh, I already mailed in my ballot. And so now I'm thinking, oh, maybe we don't want mail-in ballots after all. Too many things happen too quickly now. Maybe it's not safe, so who knows? I don't know where the league will go on that, but it's interesting how your viewpoint can change.
How is it that there was such a high proportion of the population voted absentee ahead of time? Were you sent the ballots in the mail and have the option of returning them?
In Montana, and particularly Billings, seems to like that. They send out the ballot about 3 weeks early. And I like it because you can go through the ballot, and if you don't know someone, you can look them up and find out more about them, see if you really do want to vote for that person or not. And so there's some advantages to it because you have the ballot in hand and you know everything that's on there. And then at your leisure, you can mail it in, vote and mail it in. And people in Billings seem to like it. More and more people are doing that. And the other problem is because they claim that it's too expensive to have all these polling places around town. And so they've moved almost everything over to Metro. So it's a long way to the Metro for many of us. So if you want to vote on election day, you have to go down to the Metro.
Oh, you do? There are no local precincts.
There's one on the West End somewhere, but we really need one in downtown Billings or South Side. You can go to the election office before and vote, but that's still before. On election day, you need to go down to the Metro.
But do you think the league had an impact in getting more people to vote?
We're working really hard on registering voters. And this summer especially, we have a lot of people working on that. I don't know. We've done it forever, and you can sit at a table at the library and get 2 people in an hour. You wonder if it's worth it, but maybe the presence reminds people they need to register and that sort of thing. I don't know why we don't have automatic election or voter registration the minute you actually are born and get your Social Security number. You maybe need to sign somewhere your signature or later on to make sure it's the same signature, but I find it puzzling that we have to do all this maneuvering to get registered. Now they have started registering online. You can download your registration form, fill it out, but you still have to send it in. I don't think you can sign it online. Anyway.
Well, I was going to ask both of you, do you think Montana has a somewhat more liberal registration policies than other states, most states?
There's some states that are much more, I don't know if you call it liberal, they have many more people registered. Okay. In Montana, I think one of the problems with getting mail-in ballots is a lot of people in the rural areas, and we live there, they love to go, 10 miles to the grocery store, the community hall, or wherever, to vote and see their friends, have coffee. It's a social event.
Yes. And I grew up that way.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't like this email or excuse me, a mail-in.
Well, speaking of that, you've lived in western Montana in Missoula and Arley. You've lived in eastern Montana in Billings and Rygate, and so on. Would you contrast eastern and western Montana and the cultures of the state as you've seen it? You've lobbied statewide.
I don't know if it's so much east and west as it is rural and city. I think there's a big difference between the rural people and those who live in the city. And I lived in the rural area most of my life until 20 years ago. And I think also that's the divide in the parties too, to a large extent, that although Billings is seen as Republican, it's becoming more Democratic, or more Democrats are voting here. We have more representatives than we have had in the past, I'll put it that way. The Democrats have had more representatives. It's hard to say culturally.
I was going to ask you, vertically, do you sense a difference between, and I realize this has been true historically, but is it more accentuated now between seniors, people over 50, and juniors, people under 30? Is that a significant division in the state?
I see it nationally, because just what I read, I see it nationally a lot. I think here in Billings, in terms of culture, we have now a blooming culture in young people that we haven't seen. I've never seen it before. We have all these breweries. We're known for our breweries. They have a lot of bands coming in. We have a lot of writers, all young people, younger people, musicians. This young man that I'm practicing with this afternoon, he plays viola. He's studying at the San Francisco Music Academy in San Francisco and for his MM. But he intends to come back to Billings. And so our symphony pays a little bit, not a lot, but something. And so I think there is a growing number of interesting young people. I don't know if they're voting. The ones we have around us, we have some wonderful young neighbors. A wonderful classical guitarist and a poet living right next door to us, and they don't talk politics, with me.
Right.
But I think they vote. I think they're interested. So we'll see what happens. It's exciting. I think it's Billings is starting to turn a bit, I think, in terms of its culture.
And that's within the last few years? Or
Mm-hmm. I'd say even the last 5 years.
Okay. It's odd you say that because I live, out towards Seattle. In the past, I was in the East for 25 years. And I'd keep my eye on things, and it's sensed a little change. Billings was always Republican, always commercial, always a transportation center, always ag. And the culture of Billings was suited more to a rural environment than was Missoula. Now, one of the odd things to me is Kalispell, which was traditionally somewhat like Missoula, is really moved quite far to the right.
Mm-hmm.
And Missoula continues to breed up a lot of, I guess, liberal, even some people would say radical thought. And Billings looks like, well, I'm very interested in what you said earlier. That Billings, there's a certain ferment here, and it comes culturally, perhaps more than politically even, but it is reflected in the legislative.
Yes, well, our senator, our new senator in our legislative district is probably 30 years old, Jen Gross. She's never run for office before, and she was placed there by the Democrats, and she did a great job, I thought, this year.
And her name is
Jen Gross.
Jen Gross.
Uh-huh.
And okay, so she had her first session in January, February, and
Yeah,
March.
so she'll be there next time again. And even our representative, he's been there now, I think, 3 terms, but and he's a Democrat also. They're both Democrats, but he's, I think maybe hitting 40. You know, he's not one of the old boys, so to speak. And he was one of the ones who was possibly going to run for the representative seat, the national seat, but they selected
Quist.
instead. Yeah, Kelly McCarthy. Have you
In
heard that name?
retrospect, would there have been a better choice than Quist, do you think?
You know, I don't know. I can say this about what I feel about the national parties. I think both of them have. They don't know what's going on, and they've lost a lot of power. I think it's partially because of campaign finance. They no longer get the money. Well, PAC groups get the money, and those PAC groups are supporting people outside the parties, the traditional 2 parties. So that's why we really have 4 parties now.
Okay.
They don't have the power yet because the 2 major ones aren't allowing it. But because of that, our president does not have to listen to the Republican Party.
Right.
And I don't think Democrats, they have also their own billionaires supporting them, and they don't need to listen to the party. They can do whatever they
So
wish.
it's the billionaires that are pushing extreme positions on both parties, do you think, because they're funding?
I do think so.
Okay.
At least maybe I think they have a strong influence. I'm not sure they're actually,
Right.
but they have a strong influence.
Yeah.
Even here, Quist, for example, didn't get a lot of national money. It was
Well, he didn't have any money to start with.
no,
he was a
but-
poverty person.
but you know why didn't the Democratic Party support him? And then why did they support Hillary when there were other candidates that were probably better? It's because they had money.
Yeah.
They had that
Okay.
background of people. That's what I think. And I think Trump is just having a hard time because he can't get his party together. He's not of the party.
He's not of the party, and some would feel he has no understanding of what a party is
Yeah.
about, or no
Yeah.
interest in a party.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, I agree. So things have really gotten shaken up, haven't they? And that's why I think people are uneasy. The
Well,
other,
Well, what is happening to conservatism with Trump as president?
no, I can't answer that. I don't know. I can't answer that. I consider myself a conservative in the sense that I'm strongly conservative in terms of nature, and also in political sense. So I'm not sure. I don't know how to answer that question.
I like that question. I like your answer because it's very similar to my answer. I think this country has always been about conserving what the founding fathers were primarily interested in, which is individual rights.
Mm.
They weren't after corporate rights. They weren't after plutocracies. They were dead set against aristocracies. And so basically the Constitution is focused on what to be done for the individual, that they can maximize their expression, pursue their happiness. And that's why it is really interesting to me how conservatives now, with Trump as a representative, how conservatives define themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we wanted to primarily talk to conservatives in Montana,
Mm-hmm.
and we found some real puzzlement on that among the most thoughtful conservatives we met,
Mm-hmm.
much like yours.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, probably most people think you're a liberal, as people do me, but from my vantage point, I'm an old-fashioned conservative.
Mm-hmm.
I got the values my family had. David's family, which you're part of, I always thought was conservative, but I'm sure your dad and your mother were very interested in individual rights, and they didn't want the state pushing them around.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
yeah, and that's one of the values of especially rural people. That's when I was talking about the divide. Is rural people they don't want people pushing them around. So maybe that's where the conservatism comes from.
Many of the conservatives we talk with talk about, we raise the issue of Medicaid now. Montana's almost unique position on Medicaid. In fact, we interviewed one of the guys that got it through the House and got the governor to sign it. And Montana has almost become a model for other states expanding Medicaid.
Well, the wonderful thing about that is that Democrats were in the minority, and of course they were interested in getting that. And yet they had, I think it was 11 Republicans that joined with them. Some of the hard-right Republicans didn't like those 11, mad at them for joining the Democrats and getting that through. But it was one of those times when parties came together.
Yes. Don't you think we're right now in the middle of that crisis nationally on the health issue? The Senator Collins is over here talking compassionate conservatism.
I think there's a lot of things that Trump promised that aren't going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think they'll have to end up just improving what we have. I don't think...
Well, I hope they do that, of course.
Yeah.
That's from my point, that's as much as you can hope for.
I think there's too much division.
So if that were to happen, would Montana be comfortable with where it is as having an extended and expanded Medicaid? Or would the far right be able to surge back and change it?
Well, we're already apt to lose some of our funding. Did you see in the paper they have a law that if so much income doesn't come in, that they're going to start cutting some of those?
Medicaid,
Mhm.
I see. No, I didn't.
So it depends on what the July 1 fiscal state of the nation is, I guess. So there's a possibility we'll lose some of that. But I think it's been good, and certainly the rural hospitals, the rural clinics benefited and
Yeah.
needed it.
Have you heard of any rural hospitals or clinics going under in Montana?
No, I haven't specifically, just that there is that threat.
Well, they have in the past, David. You mean in the last 2 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Recently. I think that there's probably been a gradual deterioration of rural. Although Columbus is better off now
Oh, there's a lot of,
than it was 30 years ago.
The Red Lodge Clinic, Livingston, these hospitals are expanding all over to some degree.
What about Reigate and Harlowtown in that area? Do you know?
I don't know. I haven't been up there for a while,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
There's been a national uproar about clinics on the reservations through the BIA. Are you sensitive to what's going on in Lame Deer or Pryor or those clinics?
It's a real problem. They can't find somebody here in Billings to run that office. They keep
Really?
changing directors, as I understand it, in the Billings Indian Health Office.
Right.
But we have a lot of urban Indians too.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on in the reservations. None of us Montanans. It's so sad that we grew up here and we know so little.
It is.
I hope you interview an Indian.
We tried to get Denise Juneau,
Uh-huh.
and who I think all three of us would agree is a good spokesperson for the tribes.
Oh,
I
there's
don't know
some
how
down
you feel
here.
about that. Do you think Juneau?
Oh, I liked her a lot. Yeah, I thought she was good. And we have some we have more Indians in our state legislature per population than
In the past.
what's the average or whatever. It's like, given the percent to represent, they are represent. There's more there representing us as people than what their population contains. So that's great, I
Yeah.
think.
I do too.
Yeah, and we had another interview scheduled with Patrick Cheesesteak and
Vic Charlo. Vic Charlo especially is a tribal leader over in the Saley side.
Oh yeah.
And I was thinking of going to, I'm blocking,
Rocky Boy.
the Rocky Boy.
Mm-hmm.
And because Virgil Cheesesteak, who I knew years ago, is there now. But we didn't make it. And it is an issue. When I had the Institute of the Rockies, I went to each of the reservations. I spent a whole summer trying to catch up.
Oh, good
because-
for you.
And I caught up, and I got caught into that complex of being, the dominant society generally bringing evil, and the minority society containing what was morally sound in families and in character. And while that's not always true, it's more often true than not in traditional society. And that's an issue that I would like you to respond to in more general moral terms. Do you feel we have been going downhill in Montana about our civic behavior? Or do you think Montana is about the same where it was 100 years ago? Or is it getting better?
Well,
I know, it's a gross question. but
100 years ago, you know what that reminds us of? It was very uncivil in those days,
Yes.
where you could.
Well, the Klan was very strong, the Ku Klux Klan, for one thing, 100 years ago.
Oh yeah, and also I'm thinking of the control of the newspapers and
Yes,
the
yeah.
control by the Copper Kings and all that sort of
Yeah.
thing, and the treatment of women, the treatment of all
Indians.
minorities, Chinese, all of the people was really bad. So 100 years ago, Montana was not very civil at all. In Billings, I'm proud to say that we had that Not in Our Town event about 20 years ago, and that has stuck with us. We still have that group going, and they try very hard to have civil dialogue. There's something going on at the library. Unfortunately, I never seem to catch it before, so I can go to it, but there's conversations now about the Indian relationship, civil conversations.
They're
and-
constructive conversations.
Yes.
Wow.
So they've had a couple of those here in Billings. I don't know who's even sponsoring them, but I think that's positive.
Yeah.
Um,
Are we about out of time? I respect the fact you have another appointment. And,
oh, not till this afternoon. It's fine.
okay.
One thing you haven't asked about, I'm reading this book by Tom Friedman called Thank You for Being Late. But I'd recommend you read it. It's the first half, I've only read half of it, but the first half really tells about the tremendous growth, all of these hockey curves, on all of the different kinds of digital communication.
Yes.
And you didn't ask me anything about that. And I think right now, like the YouTube and other events are expanding our knowledge, and those people involved in it, young people especially, although there's some older people too, who know how to use all of those different techniques and technical platforms, have tremendous influence. And some of them are by big companies. Amazon owns a lot of things. GE owns a lot of these technical things. So those companies are global and probably will have a huge influence on what goes on in the world. And I feel, though, that our behavior, our morals are far behind. I don't know if there's anyone out there. I'm hoping there might be someone who can somehow teach us civil conversation, to bring us back so that we're not just full of greed and bigotry, and can lead that so that swoops up in a hockey curve. But we're way behind us in terms of social behaviors, I think.
Is there any global leader that comes to mind when you think of those values? Anybody who sort of speaks for human kind?
Wow. You know, we had some good ones. I mean, Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr.,
How about the Dalai Lama?
Dalai Lama. Yeah, we have, and he's still alive.
Well, very much so. He's younger than I am.
So, yeah, we do have, I think there's individuals in our national arena that are speaking to that to some degree.
And Warren Buffett, would you allow him?
Yes, I think Warren Buffett is doing well in terms of trying to create an atmosphere of sharing.
Yes.
How would you
So-
compare the problem of civil conversation with the 50s when we had the McCarthyism and the 60s when we had the civil rights revolution there?
In the 70s when we had
In the
Vietnam.
70s with the Vietnam War.
Well, I think it's sad when people have to go out on the streets to get their voices heard. But that's what we've had to do, and even recently again. It's like, unless you're on the streets with a banner and then have multitudes of people doing that, you can't seem to get your voice heard. That's.
Do you think the women's
So I don't know if it's any different than, I think it's similar, in fact, to those early days.
So you would see this as a continuing, this lack of civil conversation as a continuing pattern?
Maybe even worse, because I think at least the last couple years, people are afraid to talk to each other. So there is no civil conversation between adversaries. Do you think?
Yeah, and do you remember a time at which you could have
I think you could.
civil political conversation?
Yeah, I think you could. In your families or, yeah, I think you could. I don't think you can now. I think people go to Thanksgiving dinner and they're very careful about what they say.
At one time, at least when we were growing up, people had a great deal of difficulty speaking, having a civil conversation about religion. Do you see that as being the same or now, same or different from what we have now?
I don't think people worry about religion at all now. I think most people have, just gone on their own way. I don't think there's any conversation. I mean, we have periodically different things. One thing, our church is starting again. We did it a couple years ago, but a process called constructive conversation. It comes out of Boston. And it's a deliberate method by which people who violently disagree in small groups of 6, 3 on each side or 4 on each side, can sit down with a facilitator, and they each have 3 minutes to say their piece about what they feel, and they go around several times until you learn. What you learn is to listen. And you hear viewpoints that you do not hear in normal conversations because people aren't talking. But when you can sit down with someone who strongly disagrees with you and begin to hear them, it's an interesting process, and they hear you.
And you have participated in this?
Oh yeah, and we're going to start it again this fall.
And it was successful in this case for
We did it
a
on.
comparatively small number of people.
Mhm. We had about, I think close to 40 at our first meeting in small groups, but we talked about gun control, gun use. and whether you strongly felt there should be more control or less control. It was very interesting.
Were there people who wanted less gun control in the groups?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
both. Oh yeah, definitely. Some people really would like all of us to be able to carry guns all the time.
Okay.
So yeah.
And they expressed themselves.
Oh yeah, and I learned something from them. Mhm.
Okay. We're drawing close to the end here.
Yeah.
And other questions or
Well, Betty's interesting. I'd like to talk to Betty for another couple hours.
And you have a little more time than you think.
Yeah, but I think maybe it's time if Betty wants to sum up what you feel is maybe most important about state level values and national values. Is there conflict or is there reconciliation in terms of looking ahead?
I do think that Montana. I think that people can talk to each other. The media is good here, in that we hear what people are doing in the legislature. We have a lot of transparency. I'm not so sure. I don't know. I don't think we have as much. I'm confused about what's happening nationally.
Yes.
So I guess I'm just feeling that Montana is a safer place to talk, change things, work on political issues as opposed to national. We have our culture, our national culture is so bent on war and spending more money on military and bent on consumerism, everybody's spending as much as they can and this and that, and I don't know, I'm really worried about where our country's going.
Okay. I guess we needed to hear that.
yes. So we thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We're very pleased, and this has been a splendid interview.
I don't know.
Well, I don't think either David or I know where the country's going. So we're not sitting there. But as political scientists, we have an ongoing interest in, at least particularly for myself, ongoing interest in comparative values as China changes, as India changes, and as I talk to young people in those countries and young people in here, there's some. There's kind of a hidden question about when I ask you about seniors and juniors. The juniors built into that is, their life is built around that.
Yes, definitely.
And that's as true in China and India and Burma
Yep.
as it is here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a commonality
That's-
looking ahead, for better or worse.
Right, and that's where we need everyone to be learning more civil engagement as they use those, and not some of the things we've seen.
If David and I are successful in what we're doing, it would be nice to use a half hour or an hour of our program for something like the workshop you're talking about.
Sure, be glad to have you.
That'd be a use. We haven't figured out what to use this for. We're both trying to answer our, our own concerns, and we'll review everybody and then decide what to do.
Sure, good.
So we'll let you know. But the question is, is it okay if we include you?
I don't know.
I'd sure like it. We've had a few women. Frankly, the most obvious one was
Dorothy Bradley.
Dorothy Bradley.
Oh, she's good. Yeah.
And but you've thought a lot about this. You've committed a lot of your life to it, and you have a strong moral fiber about civic behavior and about what society ought to be doing. You're not afraid of the oughts, and I think an awful lot of people don't want to talk about the oughts.
Mm.
So I hope you are willing to let us keep
Oh,
it. But
yeah, I suppose. That's okay.
Dorothy's really good in that regard.
Yeah.
No, I admired her a lot. I'm sorry she didn't get elected governor when she ran.
It's
Just-
kind
Just very briefly, Patty, could you talk about your natural resource and environmental values that you brought up?
Well, it's disturbing to me how the climate has changed, and everybody admits it finally, I think. Climate has changed. Doesn't matter how why or how, whether we're responsible or not, but if we can do something, if everybody could do something to help mitigate the climate change, it would be really good. We have solar panels, we recycle, we do not fly, in part because you use so much energy flying. Not having children is good. We need fewer children. We need to do everything as individuals that we can do to bring some balance, because surely I'm not worried about the earth. The earth will go on. Even if we bomb it up or we have such heat and drought and starvation that all humans die, the earth will continue. But it's not very satisfying as a human to think that that's the only positive of all this. I encourage everybody to do every little bit they can. As we sit here in an air-conditioned house, we hope not to have to get air conditioning, but we're old. Who knows?
How do you think things have changed since you were raised on that topic?
Oh, I think it's changed a lot. I see flowers blooming here now that used to only bloom mid-August. Our season has changed in Montana a lot.
I'm sorry, how do you think the cultural values
Oh, cultural
that
values
you were raised with have changed over time? Can you all
in
compare
regard to
nature.
nature.
to conservation, nature, and natural resources?
Well, the sad thing is most of us were raised on ranches and we knew something about land. We knew something about soil and animals. And now very few people, some people, never step on a piece of soil for days on end, weeks, months, maybe years. I think we've, as at least in the United States and in the cities, maybe in other countries, they still are familiar with nature, but we are, a lot of USers are unfamiliar with nature.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
Good luck. You've got a lot of editing to do, my friend.
Nope.